Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and good afternoon. Today is January 31st, 2020, the 18th day of the month of Shvat. And I am Leah Aharoni, welcoming you to yet another exciting episode of News from the Torah. And this week we'll be reading a very important Torah portion. Of course, every Torah portion is important, but this one is especially so. The Torah portion of Yitro. What happens in this Torah portion? The Jewish people come to Mount Sinai and receive the 10 Commandments. But even before receiving the 10 Commandments, God articulates the mission statement of the Jewish people, the purpose for which he took them out of Egypt and is now giving them the Torah before they go on into the promised land, into the land of Israel. And this is the mission statement of the Jewish people. Are you ready? We are here to become Mamlechet Kohanim veGoy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. What does this mean? How do you become a nation of priests? The Lubavitcher Rebbe notes that if the Torah calls us a nation of priests, that means that each one of us, each one of Jews, is a priest. A priest is not an honorific. It's not a sign of honor. It's not a sign of special rights. In Judaism, being a priest means being a servant of God. And it's a title. It's a noun. It's not something that you become. It's something that you are. Every Jew is supposed to serve God, and by serving God, serve the entire world. But there's some prerequisites for that. There's some prerequisites for receiving the Torah. There's some prerequisites for the Jewish people to become a people. And on this show today, I want to talk about these prerequisites because, unfortunately, what I'm seeing in the general society is the disintegration of the same exact values that are prerequisites for the giving of the Torah.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom! I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back. So, like we said earlier, in this Torah portion, Yitro, the Jewish people, will receive the Torah, and so will we. But before God can give the Jewish people the Torah, he has some prerequisites, and we're going to discuss them on this show today. Before we can discuss these prerequisites, I want you to meet two people. The second is Rabbi Klonimus Shapiro, a Hasidic rabbi who lived around the turn of the 20th century and died during the Holocaust. And this first is Yitro, the primary character of this Torah portion, Moshe's father-in-law. So first, about the Besetzner Rebbe. The Besetzner Rebbe, Rabbi Klonimus Shapiro, was a popular rabbi in Poland before the Holocaust. And when the Holocaust started, he was in the Warsaw Ghetto. He lost his son, he lost his daughter-in-law, he lost his sister-in-law, his entire family during the bombings of the ghetto in the early days. He had 2 or 3 different opportunities to escape, but he turned them all down. And on one occasion, when he was offered an opportunity to escape, he conditioned it on leaving with 30 other people. And the people who offered him this opportunity said, well, no, let's get you out and then we'll get everybody else out. And he said, no, first you get the other people out and now we'll be the last. Of course, that didn't happen. He perished in a concentration camp, and his books were buried under the rubble of the Warsaw Ghetto. After the Holocaust, a construction worker was clearing out the rubble, and he found milk jugs. In the milk jugs, he saw manuscripts with a note, and the note said, please bring this to the rabbinate of Warsaw. So, of course, by the end of Holocaust, there was no rabbinate in Warsaw, but this construction worker brought the milk jugs to the Jewish Museum of Warsaw. An Israeli official by the name of Baruch Dovdevani was visiting Warsaw, and after conversations with the students of the Pesachner Rebbe, he set out to search for manuscripts. Some of his manuscripts survived. As he combed through the archives of the Jewish Museum, sure enough, he found the milk jugs with the manuscripts, and these manuscripts were published. Among the manuscripts were the speeches that the Pesachner Rebbe gave during the Holocaust in Warsaw Ghetto as he was trying to keep the spirits up and encourage the Jews around him. This is what he did for the 3 years that he lived in the ghetto. He tried to encourage the Jews around him and give them hope to set up religious institutions, even in the ghetto. And the Pesachner Rebbe has a very unique approach to every one of the Torah portions. In every one of the Torah portions, he shows how Judaism and Torah are applicable in even the hardest and harshest of circumstances. And he has the same insight in this Torah portion. And to understand what he's telling us, we need to go back to Yitro. Thank God we're not living in the Holocaust. We're not living through that kind of hell. But many people are really struggling through COVID with unemployment and lockdowns and health crises and deaths, unfortunately, among families and friends. It's a very hard time for many of us. So these words of encouragement are especially poignant. Who was Yitro, and why is this Torah portion called in his name? If you go back to the beginning of the book of Exodus, there is a story there. Moses saw an Egyptian strike a Jew, and Moshe killed that Egyptian. A little while later, he saw 2 Jews fight, and he rebuked them for fighting. So one of the Jews said, who do you think you are? Are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian? Moshe understood that his quote-unquote crime has been revealed, and so he fled Egypt to a country called Midian. In Midian, he came upon a well. At a well, he met some nice girls who he helped out. They invited him to their home, and their home was the home of Yitro. Yitro was the high priest of Midian, but he became disappointed in the idol worship of his country, and he tried looking for a different god. He tried every other deity in the world until he settled on the one true God. And that was when the Midianites decided, we don't want you leading us. And they basically dethroned him. So Moshe came to the home of Yitro. He married one of his daughters. He had 2 children in that home. And at a certain point, God told Moshe to go back to Egypt and lead the Jewish people out. At first, Zipporah and the children traveled with Moshe to Egypt. But when they met Aaron, Moshe's brother, Aaron said, don't bring your wife and children into Egypt. It's bad enough for those people who are already there. They certainly do not need to suffer. So Zipporah took her children, turned back, and went back to her father Yitro. Now when Yitro heard that the Jewish people left Egypt, he took Zipporah and his 2 grandsons and traveled out to the wilderness, to the desert, to join the Jewish people. And commentaries ask, what made Yitro come? Why did he leave his comfy place in Midian to travel out to the desert and meet the Jewish people? And this is where the Parshat Rebbe has a very, very poignant insight. You see, he says, Yitro could have stayed in his place and sent messenger to Moshe asking him to send somebody to teach him Torah. What prevented Yitro from learning the Torah back home? He could have just stayed back and order a tutor for Moshe. But no, Yitro came out to the wilderness before the Torah was given to receive the Torah in the wilderness together with the Jewish people. And on this, the Parshat Rebbe brings a very profound insight. Every day, a Jew says the central prayer of our religion, Shema Yisrael, Hear Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. It is the first verse that parents teach their children when they're small. It is the last sentence that a Jew says before he passes away. And it is a prayer that we say 3 times every day when we wake up and before we go to sleep. And in this prayer, we say that we're supposed to love God with all of our heart. On this says the Parshat Rebbe, you cannot presume to worship God only under certain circumstances. We say in Shema Yisrael that you're supposed to worship God in your home and when you're out walking around. You're supposed to teach it to your children. So our Torah really is applicable, relevant every time, under any circumstances, at home and at work, inside and outside, in good times and in bad times. And if the Jewish people were to receive the Torah in the land of Israel, they could have thought that it is only applicable when we're in a good situation, when we're at home, when we're in the promised land. But the Torah was given out in the desert, in the wilderness, while we were on our way after being attacked by Amalek. And this is supposed to teach us that the Torah is relevant even in bad times, even during crises, even when we're struggling. And this is what Yitro came to signify. Yitro could have asked Moshe to send somebody to teach him Torah while he stayed in Midian, but no, Yitro came out to join the Jewish people in the wilderness because he wanted to learn it and to receive the Torah together with the Jews, even in their hard times. And this lesson is very profound for us as well. We are in an extremely difficult situation. At least many of us are. Many of us, like we said, have health issues. Many people are struggling with their finances. Many people are struggling under lockdown, have little kids around, have not seen their parents in a long time, have not seen their kids in a long time. Many families are struggling with issues of marital strife or loneliness or mental health. And at times like this, we say, do we really need religion? Do we really need spirituality? Is this where I should be investing my time and my energy? And the answer is absolutely yes. Our Torah is relevant and applicable. Not only is it relevant, but it gives us the tools to deal with every single situation. It gives us the psychological resources to deal with every single crisis. It was there to give the Parshat Rebbe the tools to give life and encouragement and empowerment to the downtrodden Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto. And it is here now, in these critical days of the COVID pandemic, to give us the strength and the tools to deal with the many challenges that we're facing as we go through this pandemic, hopefully to come out stronger on the other side. After we come back, we will talk about the other prerequisites for giving the Torah. And the main one of them, the one we're lacking most during these difficult months, is leadership. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this break.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
And we are back. So the Jewish people left Egypt, crossed the Red Sea, and now they're in the desert. And what's the very first thing the Jews do in the desert? The very first thing is they create their leadership. When Yitro comes to visit the Jewish people, he sees Moses sitting in judgment day in and day out. And he says, hey, this is not going to work. You cannot lead the Jews all on your own. You need to delegate. So of course, the first thing Moses says, no, but this is how it goes. And Yitro says, nah, you cannot do this. You need to delegate. And here is what you do. You need to find people who are A, honest and trustworthy, B, have their own money, have their own wealth, and they're not flattered or easily influenced, and C, people who are not looking to make a quick buck, people who are looking out for the public good, and who are not just concentrating on making money. So find good people like this, and they will lead the Jewish people. And of course, Moses takes this great advice and goes to create a new leadership class, people who will lead the Jews. Now, this story is so important because what it says is that before you can go anywhere, you need to create good leadership. There's an amazing book called Good to Great, and it looks at history of really great companies who have created a lot of value, who have grown for a long time, for at least 15 years, and performed at least twice as well as other comparable companies on Wall Street. And what this book, Good to Great, does is it tries to figure out what are the factors that help companies succeed. And the very first factor, the biggest reason why company succeeds, is because it has what he calls a level 5 CEO leader. A level 5 leadership is what he calls humble leadership. It is somebody who is invested in doing the right thing by the company and by its employees, and not necessarily what is the best thing for the person himself. It's somebody who is invested in the success of the project and not just in his own success or his own glory or his own hubris. And this is what's so important here. I think we're witnessing a crisis in American leadership. About a week ago, Joe Biden stepped into the Oval Office and signed 30 executive orders in one day. No American president in recent decades has signed more than 4 or 5 executive orders in their first few weeks. But here is Joe Biden ruling by decree with over 30 executive orders, and many of them quite unpopular. But there's another story that's happening on Wall Street. I don't know if you have been following it. The Gamestop story that I'll tell you about. And I think it really, really underlies the crisis in American leadership more than anything else. So what's Gamestop and why is it important? Gamestop is a Texas computer games company that has not been doing so well. And some big-time investors, hedge funds, decided to quote-unquote short sell it. I'll explain to you what a short sell is. A short sell is when you borrow some stock of a company at a certain price and you sell it right away. And then sometime later, you buy it back and give it back to the person you borrowed it from, hopefully at a lower price. So let's say I want to short sell Gamestop. And let's say I borrow some stock of it at $10 and I sell it at $10. And I hope that a month later, I'll be able to buy some of the stock at $5 and give it back to somebody I borrowed it from and basically make the difference. So a few hedge funds borrowed and sold or short sold a lot of stock in GameStop. Now, a bunch of regular investors, small people like you and me, got together on a social platform called Reddit and basically encouraged each other to buy GameStop stocks. And what that did, obviously, is it drove the price of GameStop up. If GameStop cost $4 per stock just a few months ago, now it's at over $300. Now, these hedge fund companies that borrowed the stock now have to sell it back, buy it and return it. And now the stocks that they bought at and sold at $4, $5, $10, $20, they need to buy it back at $200, $300. And obviously they're losing a lot of money, something to the tune of $3 billion. So why is this story so important? There's another component to the story. The small investors, the ones that are buying this stock in this company and a few other companies, are using a platform called Robinhood. It's an app on your phone where you can trade stocks. And what Robinhood did is that it blocked people from the ability to buy more stock in GameStop and other companies. And why did Robinhood do it? Because Robinhood passes information about what people are buying and selling to bigger companies. And those bigger companies are paying for this information because it gives them an impression of where the market is going. So we have small investors, people like you and me, trying to hurt big investment companies, and big investment companies trying to play the game illegally to prevent investors from making money. And this is where the crisis of leadership comes in, because the government can do one of two things. It can step into the game and change the rules on small investors, and that will basically lead to revolution because people are really angry at big investors at Wall Street. People are out of work, everybody's hurting, and people on Wall Street are making money. It's business as usual. Or the government can step back and do nothing, and then these small investors who band together and it looks like brought down one hedge fund can go ahead and do that again and again and again, basically creating a Wall Street crisis. Now, a Wall Street crisis is not a crisis for Wall Street. A Wall Street crisis hurts every single person who works for a company that may now go bankrupt, and it also hurts everybody who has a pension fund. Do you have a pension fund? Do you have a 401k? Well, if these big-time investors go down, guess whose money they're taking down with them? Yours. So yes, the government is now in a bind and has created a crisis of leadership because Biden certainly doesn't have the political capital to bail out Wall Street if anything should go wrong. Now, more than that, for the past few years, social movements like Black Lives Matter have been playing the Marxist socialist card of class struggle. A central idea in Marxism is that all of history is basically a class struggle. Rich versus poor, and now, in recent decades, black versus white, men versus women, victims versus oppressors. In their mind, all of history is basically a class struggle. And now this is exactly how this GameStop story is playing out. It's little people, mostly young people who got hurt during the 2008 Wall Street crisis, who remembered it as kids and whose families got hurt, see themselves as crusaders getting back at the big, bad rich people of Wall Street. And it's really not about the money. It's becoming personal now. So like we said, Biden and the White House have overplayed their hand, and they cannot rescue Wall Street. And big technical companies like Facebook and Amazon and Google and Apple have overplayed their hand in trying to censor and deplatform and basically shut up everybody who doesn't believe in them. In this latest story, Google has removed thousands of reviews of Robinhood to prevent people from knowing the truth. And we're about to witness a real economic warfare clash. It's now small investors against big investors on Wall Street, and there's nobody to step in and centralize the system back, bring back some order, because everybody has overplayed their hand. So we're really witnessing a very important moment that can turn into a watershed moment for American politics and for American finance. And with so much anger and frustration and such a bad economic state, can make one wrong move by the government or Wall Street into a real political clash with people going out to the streets. And whichever way it goes, I think what it really does is underlies the crisis of leadership. As you look around your country, as you look around the United States, as you look around Europe, and even if you look around Israel, are you really seeing strong leadership? We have the same kind of crisis in Israel, where Israelis are about to go for their fourth election in under 2 years because nobody is able to put together a normal governing government. Countries, civilizations cannot do well without strong, ethical, trustworthy leadership. You just cannot succeed this way. If we do not have people with trust, people who are out there to do the best for us at the helm, then we cannot live our lives comfortably, and we cannot make decisions collectively. And this crisis of leadership is the primary story of the Torah this week. You cannot go anywhere without proper leadership. So as soon as the Jews walk into the desert, the first thing that the Torah tells us to do is to get our leadership in place. And I really hope that we can all get our leadership in place, because without proper leadership, what the Torah calls the eyes of the community, we really cannot see where we're going. And there are more prerequisites for getting the Torah. More about that after the break.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Ben-Tekoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany's but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
And we are back. So, in the previous segments, we talked about some of the preconditions you need to have a nation, and some preconditions you need to give the Jewish people the Torah. And now I think we will talk about the most important one. When the Jewish people camped out next to Mount Sinai, the Torah says, and the Jewish people encamped there against the mountain. And it uses a singular form to say that the Jewish people acted as one. And Rashi, the primary commentator on the Torah, says that the Jewish people camped as one person with one heart. And this prerequisite of unity was what enabled God to give us the Torah. We're only 2 months away from the Passover Seder. And at the Seder, we sing a song, Dayenu. I think it's a song that each one of you who has been to a Seder knows. In Dayenu, we say, had God brought us to the desert and not given us the Torah, it would have been enough. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe asks on this, what's the point of bringing us to the desert, to Sinai, if God were not to give us the Torah? Why would that be enough for us? And he answers, the very fact that the Jews could stand by Mount Sinai in perfect unity as one person with one heart is such an accomplishment that would have been enough, even if we would not get the Torah. Now, I'm sure that as you're listening to this, you mentally scan the newspaper headlines, and unity is nowhere to be found. And yes, I think that our societies have reached a critical point of disunity, when even things like medication or health or science are becoming points of contention, not in scientific circles, but in political ones, when a drug, a medicine that can save lives potentially, becomes a point of political debate. And your outlook on medication or science or things that need to be done to stop a deadly pandemic become political questions divided by party allegiance. But I think it goes much, much deeper than that. And I know that this segment, we're talking a lot about American politics, but I think this is where this is happening in the sharpest way. About 2 weeks ago, an 18-year-old teen from Massachusetts by the name of Helen Duke tweeted a tweet that identified her mother, aunt, and uncle to the FBI as taking part in Capitol riots before the inauguration. The FBI was apparently trying to identify as many participants of the Capitol riots as possible, and the FBI tweeted asking the public to come forward with any names. This girl, Helen Duke, who is 18, saw her mother, aunt, and uncle in a video from the riots and identified them to the FBI. Now, I don't care what your politics are, and I don't care what you think about the Capitol riots. I don't care what you think about January 6th. It's completely irrelevant. What is relevant is that an 18-year-old child turned in her mother, aunt, and uncle into the police. And unless her mom, aunt, and uncle are ticking bombs that present a danger to the society, a child turning them into the police is just unacceptable. And I think what just happened is that America has reached its Pavlik Morozov moment. Who is Pavlik Morozov, and why is this important? Pavlik Morozov was a teen in Soviet Russia during the 1930s as Russian communists entered into a class war against peasants, especially rich peasants, people trying to make a living and keep their families fed. Pavlik Morozov was the son of a rich peasant family, and so he turned his whole family into communists. The family killed him to prevent him from doing even more damage, but then the communists came and killed the family. Pavlik Morozov became a legend, a hero in Soviet propaganda, and generations of Soviet children were brought up to emulate Pavlik Morozov, to give up their own families and turn them in to communist police. Now, I don't care what you think about communism. I don't care what you think about politics. Educating children to turn in their own families and to turn in their families to the police for ideological motives is just plain wrong. Family allegiance, the ties between parents and children, are the strongest and most fundamental basic ties of the family. If you think of a family as a molecule, as an atom from which the society is made up of, it's basically tearing the atom apart. And when tear the atom apart, what you have is an atomic bomb. So public Morozov moments are the atomic bombs that blow up societies. And unfortunately, I think America just crossed this Rubicon, and America has reached its own public Morozov moment. For the past several years, I've been watching people turn on their family on Facebook, on social media, people tearing into their family, people criticizing their family, people standing each other up at Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas dinners and Hanukkah parties over politics. And I found that to be very painful. And I repeatedly said that America is about to reach its public Morozov moment, where people will turn on their family, where this political struggle will divide mother from father, mother from child, turn brother on brother. And when you do that, there is no going back. When politics divide families, it means the end of the society. And I think with this Helen Duke story that happened 2 weeks ago, unfortunately, America has reached its public Morozov moment, where families are turning on each other. And that means that a civil war, unfortunately, is quite near unless the country can get some healing, which I'm not seeing where it's going to come from. So what the Torah is telling us is that you cannot have the Torah. You cannot have a society. You cannot have any kind of law. You cannot have any kind of system unless you have unity. And what we're witnessing in these days is radical disunity. Now, I know that many people are listening to this, and if you're, depending on which side of the political spectrum you are, you will say, yes, but these people who stormed the Capitol, they're evil. They deserve to be turned in. And maybe that's true. Maybe they do deserve to be turned in. I'm not going to make a call on that. But here is what is true. They do not deserve to be turned in by their own children. And by the way, I would have said the same exact thing if kids would start to turn their parents in over the Black Lives Matter riots. It's just plain wrong for relatives to be turning on each other, for children to be turning on their parents, and for parents to be turning on their children. But this happened in a certain climate, and there is one organization that very unfortunately is responsible for that. And once again, it's Black Lives Matter. Because Black Lives Matter made it their goal to disrupt the traditional family and to supersede traditional family with quote-unquote villages where people raise each other. Now, villages are great, and yes, it helps to have a village to raise a child, but a village is never a substitute for a family. Nuclear family is the smallest, most basic element of society. And, where does this leave us, you and me, listening to the show? It's very easy to look at the story and say these people are bad, or there's a lot of division, or to shake your head at this disunity. But have you looked at your own family? Have you turned inwards to look at your own family and see how you can create more unity in your family, in your neighborhood, in your social circles? How maybe you can transcend politics and befriend somebody who thinks differently. When you do have a political debate, how to hold that debate in a way that's honorable and that's respectful and that realizes the value of the other person. Because you can absolutely not agree over something, but you can still hold up the other side's right to say what it has to say. You can respect the people on the other side, even if you completely disagree with them. It's not the same thing. We can argue about ideas and we can still respect each other as people. We can even love each other as people. And yes, I have people in my family with whom I disagree about politics. And we can argue about politics. And they go to certain rallies that I don't approve of, and I go to other rallies that they don't approve of. But here's the thing. When my relatives try to drag the conversation into politics, I tell them stop. We are not going to ruin this family relationship over politics. Never. So this is what I suggest to you. Preserve your family, keep it out of politics, and stay safe. So before I sign off, I bless you that during this coming week of Parshat Yitro, you take some opportunities to implement the ideas we have been discussing, the eternal relevance of the Torah, leadership skills, and unity in your own life. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.